What I'd like to do is continue to work on the user interaction of the application. So we're going to add a little bit of HTML here. I'll save it and you can see what it looks like. So we're adding a few buttons here: rectangle, square, circle. We have an X and Y. And so I'm going to change this. As you can see how big this is, I want to just change that. So we've got a little bit of CL input. So I'm going to add a little bit of CSS for the CL input. So that makes a little bit more sense. So we're going to copy that into the style right there. Save that, and that just makes that a little bit smaller. Now, you'll notice here we have a show button. And what I want to do is I want to change the show button so that it only displays this when I press the show button. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy a few lines of the code. So the panel, we need the panel to exist. But the SVG here, we're going to do the SVG and append the SVG. So I'm going to copy this out. And I'm only going to do it when the draw button is pressed. Now, I shouldn't have done that yet. What I'm going to do is there's a little bit of a trick that I do. Just save this and format it. But I'm going to comment this code out right now. Just comment this out. And so what I want to show you is I use this little technique where I have an attribute called TDD. And I've started doing this lately. Makes my life a little easier. There's 1,000 ways to do this, but this is one that's worked very well for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an attribute. Based on the attribute, I'm going to do different things. In this case, when I press the show is when I'm going to have this show up. All right. So I'm going to go to this, and the first thing I'm going to do is when they click, I'm going to set a constant to do equals e.get or e.target. And I have a funny feeling we're going to be using target quite a bit. So rather than doing it that way, I'm going to create another const target. No, just element is equal to target, e.target, and then we can do el.get attribute. Okay, and I'm just going to print that. Oops. And let's just make sure that works properly. So that's good. So that drawing disappeared now because we took it out. And now when I click something, I want to see whether it actually does me the to do, and it does. It's perfect. New square, new rectangle, and this is show is going to be show. Yep. So that's perfect. So now what I want to do is I only want to do this part right here. If to do is equal to show, we're going to do that to that. Let's just look at what that is. Uncomment these lines. Format it so we can make it look all pretty, which is important. So let's just go through what it's going to do. So when we press the show button, it's going to create the SVG constant that was drawn from the panel, and then it's going to log it just so we can see it, and then it's going to append it to the SVG. That's very cool. So let's just push that button and see whether it actually does anything. Okay, and it does one shape right there. Now, let's figure out why that shape is getting there and get rid of it. And the reason that shape is being put there, oh, look at this. There's probably two shapes being put there. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this guy out, and we don't need the console log. I want to get rid of all the console logs. We don't need this one anymore. Let's see where this K1, K2 is coming from. That's coming from shapes, line 54. We'll get rid of that guy. I just want to clean that right up. So when I press save, look at this. We're getting our drawing at index line 8. So let's see what we can do there. Oh, we didn't save that guy. All right, so we've cleaned it all up. That's perfect. All right, let's continue on. The next thing I want to do, using the same to-do philosophy, is when the user presses the rectangle, I want to draw a new rectangle on there, okay? And so for right now, we're just going to hard code the rectangle. So we'll just, right here, we'll go if to do is equal to new rectangle. We'll just do a log to make sure we're actually getting it, because it's the obvious that usually doesn't work. And what we're going to do is we're just going to copy one of these. And we're just going to say rec is equal to panel.create rectangle, and we'll just hard code it in that position and see how that works. All right, let's save this. All right, so when we save it, there is nothing on it. So let's do a show. There's still nothing on it. So if we do the rectangle, add new rectangle, but it didn't show up there. So let's try doing a show again and look at that. So what ends up happening now, and this is really important, is the original drawing is not being updated. So the only time it actually is doing it is when we re-show it. And as you can see, we can re-show over and over and over again. All right. So that's actually not that cool. We actually have to clean that up. So let's refresh. Let's make it one other addition as well here. Is rather than hard coding where that's going, let's actually put it where we want to put it. And what I'm going to do there is we don't need this console log anymore, because we know that's working. I'm going to print out the X and Y. So it's idx dot value comma idy dot value. Let's just print that out and make sure it's what we expect it to be. So if I press rectangle, yep, 1, 1. Let's change this one to some other number, 5 or 7 or something. There we go, 1, 7. So that's working. So now instead of passing hard-coded values, let's actually put that in here. Maybe it's just a teensy bit bigger so we can work with it. Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this, let's say, at 50, and we're going to add a rectangle, and then we're going to put another one at, let's say, 150, and add the rectangle. And then we're going to show and see what happens. All right, so for some reason, they're all not showing up. So maybe if I add another rectangle at 250, do another rectangle and do a show and see what this shows up. And it doesn't appear to be working quite the way we think it is. So let's have a look and see why. Now, in order to help us debug this, what we're going to do is we're going to add that class. So if we look at our HTML right now, what we've done is we've been able to put a box around where we're drawing things. So if you look at that, it has a class CL box. What I want to do is draw that same box around every SVG that we're adding. So we're going to go into our shapes, and what we're going to do is when we draw, we create the SVG. We're going to add an element, svg.add attribute. Oh no, I think it's .class name. In this case, it is a property, so we're going to set that to CL box and save that. And what that should do is I'm going to add a rectangle at 1, 1. I'm going to add one at 100, and then I'm going to do a show. And we have an error here. Cannot assign class name of property. Okay, we'll just have a look and see what's wrong. So interesting fact, this doesn't work. So what we have to do is we have to do an SVG set attribute, And the attribute we're going to set is class. And we're going to actually set it to CL box. Just save that and go up here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to show. Oh, and we got a nice box. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a rectangle at 1, 1. Then we're going to do a rectangle at 101 and do another one at, let's say, 150 and 1. And then we're going to draw it again. And, oh, we can't tell here. So what we're going to do is we're going to change the Y to 100 and do a show, or do an add. And then we're going to do a show and we'll see it. But what we're going to see now is it's actually adding them to the end. Because we're doing an append, it's adding them to the end. So from a user experience perspective, this isn't very good at all. So I'm going to go back to my tests now, and let's create a test that's actually going to put us in a situation that we want to put us in. So I'm going to go back into testing our drawing. And the way I'm going to test my drawing now is if I add a new element, I'm going to just do that, so to go to the bottom of this. Now, if I add a new element, and I don't even need to keep track of what it is, new rectangle, and I'm going to put it at 200, 200. And if I add a new shape, I now want the children length to be 3. And this is going to be a little tricky now, because let's do that save. Let's run our tests. Oh, look at this. This is not testing what I expect it to be. So that should be a 3. So now when I add a new rectangle, I actually want that to automatically be added to the SVG element. So what's happening, just to try to explain what's happening, is it's not live. So when I add attributes to the panel, the way we've written the shadow objects are not putting themselves into the SVG. So again, it's a fairly easy fix, but I want you guys to understand very clearly what's going on now. So in the draw, when I tell it to create a rectangle, it's creating the shadow object, but it's not putting itself into the SVG. So we're going to do a couple things. So once we do the draw, we're going to keep track of the fact that we actually have it. So this.svg is equal to SVG. So now the object, I've just put that into state. Really important concept now. I've just added the SVG into state. So now when we add a new shape right there, what we want to do is we want to, let's see where it's actually appending it right there. So that's what we want to do. We want to do an svg.append. So we actually want to do this, or close facsimile to this, every time a shape gets added. And again, it's not going to work. You guys can speculate why it's not going to work. So right in here. So we've created the shape, put it in the key. Now we still need to get an element for it. So rather than passing it the shape, all we have to do is just this rectangle. We have to do a get element. So what we've done is we've created a rectangle. We've added the rectangle to our shadow shapes. For that rectangle, now we're going to get the element and we're going to append the element to the SVG. Let's see if this works. Let's save that. Let's run our test. Now, we're creating some very, very bad side effects. Let's have a look and see what our tests are telling us. So our test is telling us right now, SVG is not defined. So SVG is not defined. Now, why is it not defined? Which line is it actually running? So it's failing at line 46 of my test. No, it's failing at line 46 of my object. But let's look at where it was called. So it was called from test line 34. Let's go test line 34. It's way up here. Look at that. Line 34 is the first time we go to create an element. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about side effects. I made a logic change. The logic change was good for my purpose, but it actually broke a prior piece of code. So that is excellent. That means our tests are protecting us the way they should. So let's see if we can correct that. So what I'm going to suggest now is we're now going to, and the reason for that is, the error is it says SVG is not defined. So if we go back to our test, it's adding a shape before we've created the SVG. So I think that'll be a fairly easy fix, but this could have saved us in production. So what I'm going to do right here is say if this.svg, oh, look at that. Sorry, we haven't even got to that area yet. This should be this.svg. Okay, gave away the problem. But anyways, it's this.svg. I'm going to rerun the tests again. And again, you'll see what the problem is and how we have to correct it. So if we add an element to the drawing before we've put it on the SVG, we're not live yet. So cannot read property of undefined, so that's great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually say if we've added that object, if we actually are live with an active SVG, then all right, let's run our tests. So these tests are doing just what they want us to do. They're protecting ourselves. Yes, our test passed. So let's go to our user interface. And again, I want you to understand what we did is we had a user interface issue. We don't like the way the user interface worked. We created a test to point out the problem. And now we go back to our user interface and we update the user interface. So what I'm going to do is just kind of silly. I'm going to add one at 1.1. We're going to put one at 150 and one, add another one. And then we're going to do a show. Yes, there it is. Now let's try to add another one. Let's put this one at 150 and see how that works. And we can't tell anything. I think we have another bug in here, so I'm going to change this to 100. There it is. We have a little bug in here, but it's not that. So what it's done is this now has become live. So this show becomes useless now. We actually want to get rid of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create the location and put it right at the very beginning. So what I've got in show right now, we're going to get rid of, or in, let's go to our index. All right, so what we have in our show, and I can start getting rid of some of this stuff. So we can draw this right away, and we can append this right away. So I'm going to take that. It shows I can do anything right now. We're going to use it later. So we create our panel. There we go. And now the question becomes, and here's what the bug is, I think, is when we draw our shapes, we want it to be 400 by 400, and I don't think that's happening. So to me, this doesn't look like it's 400 by 400. It looks a little small. So what I'm going to do is right there, I'm going to do, oh, we printed console log. Okay, so let's have a look at it. There it is right there. And yes, look at that. There is no width and height being created for our SVG. So the first thing we're going to do again is we're going to run our tests. So when we do a draw, where's the first place we do a draw? I'm going to go to the top. I'm just going to do a search for draw. Yeah, and there's some text. So there we do our draw. It expects children to be 2. We don't need this console log. What I'm going to do is put I expect the SVG, expect SVG dot, I think, get attribute. Width dot 2b and what did we say that it's supposed to be? We said that it is supposed to be a drawing 401. So not this one. Should be 401. Width and then height. Do that, and let's make sure our test failed. And so what it must be doing on the drawing is just defaulting to some sort of a standard. Or, okay, and then failed. And of course we know why it failed, because it's 401 and it's null. So let's change that. So we're going to be a little lazy here, which is fine. We're going to just change this to this, and height should be 2. We're doing a couple more than a line of code at a time. Change that. And then we're going to go to shapes. And when shapes, when we, nope, there we go, drawing. Now when we create the drawing, first thing we do when we create the drawing, there it is, we're going to set the attributes of the SVG. So SVG dot set attribute is equal to this dot width and attribute height is equal to this dot height. All right, we're going through a lot of stuff here. This is pretty cool. Now look at that. So if we go over there, it is actually creating it the height that we want. Now the problem is because we're using live server again, it's actually running the code before we run it through the test, but we can't help that. That's fine. We've created tests first to make sure the tests work. Let's see what our problem here is. Oh, look at that. Here we are again, the quote problem. So let's go to our test. And now it's not 401, it's quote 401. That's going to cause us a little problems later on. But for right now, we're going to go with it until it actually causes a problem, so we have to fix it. We'll run our test now. And that works. So that is perfect. So our tests are working like they're supposed to. We can now go, I want to do one at, well, let's create one right here. Rectangle, ooh, there we go. We're going to create one at 150, 150. Rectangle, yes. And, oh, there's our old one, but that's fine. And then we can do a show, and the show does nothing. So that's beautiful. We're setting up rectangles. Now, the next thing we need to do is see if we can actually get this guy right here and do something with it. All right, so we'll wait and do that in the next segment.